Hello and welcome. My name is Andy Salkeld and this is my Start Competing Warhammer 40,000 video segment. This is episode 5 where we are talking about the preparation for the event. We've done 4 episodes previous where we've covered kind of logistical things, motivation, and just generally the functionality of how things run. But this is things you can do in advance that can potentially help you on your way and make it an easier and less kind of pressured situation. My motivation for doing these is that I have struggled with anxiety for many years and I was very nervous going into my first events, and the hope is that by sharing what I have gained from doing events for 6 months, it can help other people along the way. So we're going to kind of walk through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is kind of a psychological concept as what people need to feel fulfilled, etc. at different stages in life, starting with the very basics of the necessities, working up to self-actualization. We're not going that far, but it's sort of the things that you need to be aware of at an event. So, first things, think about food and water. Events last 9 to 10 hours. You are going to need to probably have lunch, probably breakfast beforehand, and maybe think about dinner afterwards. And similarly, throughout the day, you are going to need to drink water. I personally bring a about 2-litre flask of water with me. Just keep it in my backpack so that I can drink as and when I need it. If I finish it, I fill it up from one of the taps or water fountains nearby. And just do that. I typically don't bring snacks with me because at a lot of the venues they do provide snacks, but I would recommend taking something or being aware of something. Similarly, check the event details to see whether lunch is provided. A lot of the events I've been to do provide lunch, or at least give a recommended option. So at like some of the GTs, they were hosted in school sports halls, and as a result, they opened the cafeteria. So there was a kind of a default lunch. A different GT I went to, there was a very obvious Tesco local nearby where people went and bought lunch from. But be aware of it and plan it throughout your day. Next thing is about comfort. So moving up, you're alive. Now let's worry about getting you safe and secure and comfortable. So think about clothing. You're going to be stood up for 9 to 10 hours a day. You are going to be in a room full of a lot of other people, which creates a lot of heat. So I personally always go with shorts and a t-shirt, typically a breathable one if possible, just because it keeps me cooler throughout the day. And when it gets hot, I'm very grateful that I am wearing something like that. I have found just wearing jeans or something like that can often be far too hot throughout a long event. Similarly, good shoes, or make sure you sit down often. You are going to be stood up. You are going to be looking down at a table that is kind of 1 to 3 feet away from you, depending on height. So be aware of your posture and be aware of how much you are standing up. If you've ever worked in a retail environment where you have kind of spent all day on your feet serving people and helping customers, it's very similar to that at the end of the day. I'm always conscious of how much my legs, particularly my shins and ankles, hurt at the end of it. Similarly, be aware of your posture. It's very easy to stoop over like this the entire day because of the table height. If you can try and find a way to make that work better for you, do that. And those are that's the personal stuff you can think about ahead of an event. Now we've got to get to the event, so transportation, and this is for both you and your army. For you, be aware of kind of how long it will take, whether you're driving, busing, training. Just make sure you've planned it in advance. These events kind of don't stop or pause for people to turn up, because they're often on relatively tight schedules for the day. So turning up late could cause you to lose time from your clock in the round, and at worst could result in a game loss and things like that. Never happened to me, but just be aware of it when you're planning. Transporting the army is another matter that has is very opinionated. So a lot of people will use different forms of cases, tubs, boxes, whatever. Sometimes with foam packing, sometimes with bubble wrap. Just depends on preference. My personal preference, and the one I will share, is creating magnet cases. So what this basically means is you buy magnets to sit or to glue onto the underside of your bases for your models. Then you buy magnet sheets, which are just A4 sheets, and you stick them in a really useful box. And you can actually, depending on the strength of the magnets, you can actually do this on all 6 internally facing walls of a box, which gives you much more surface area for carrying than if you are just using kind of single sheets above each other. There's guides to make these online all over the shop. I found them very useful for transporting. One of the things to be aware of is when you are in a car, there are vibrations throughout the car as you're traveling, and depending on how the models are transported, that can put significant pressure on some of the thinner areas of the model, such as the ankles or the knees, and it can cause breaks. With that, take super glue with you, or take some form of glue that's appropriate for your models, just because they do break, sometimes they fall, and you don't want to get caught with a shattered model or something like that when you're at an event. So now you're where you are. I'm just checking my notes here. Some of the things, the kind of standard things to be able to take with you are your rules. So this is your codex supplements, your any other kind of documents that go with them. The tournament pack. So whilst not essential to be printed out, I like printed out. I like having a hard copy to be able to refer to, but often just having access online is enough. Same with the rules in a lot of instances, but it's always nice to be able to have them. Some tournaments like you to bring printed copies of your army list so that you can hand it to your opponent for them to look over. I've never had to do this, and similarly, I've never had to refer to my hard copy codex, but it is something to be aware of that might be required from you. One of the other things you'll need access to is the most recent tournament pack. So right now we're playing in Nephilim, and having access to the book or access online to Nephilim, the Nephilim missions, and the secondaries you can take will help speed up that process a lot. And with all of these things, having a pen is useful. I like taking paper scoring sheets to be able to write down on, and I like to compare these to my opponents at the end, because it just means that we have two logs to be able to kind of confer with and make sure that everyone is scoring the correct amount of points. So let's talk about some of the other things essential to playing. So this is your tape measure and your dice. So tape measure, I typically just use a standard kind of metal DIY one, and that has served me for many years. One thing I learned very quickly is make sure it doesn't have any tassely bits or kind of loops to put around your belt, etc. And the reason being is this can catch on your models and can occasionally yeet them across a room. So avoid those where possible. Just cut them off if you have them. But also on measuring, what I take with me is I take some pre-measured sticks. So these can be found very often on Etsy or something like that, maybe in your faction colors, whatever. But essentially I take a 6-inch movement, because this is the standard movement characteristic of a Sister of Battle. I take a 9-inch, I take 2 to 3 9-inch pre-measured sticks, because these are what deep strikes are, and therefore I can set them up and set my models up appropriately. And then finally, I take 2 to 3 combat gauges. So these are typically Ls that have 0.5 inches, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch measured on them in different characteristics. And these allow you to do your second rank fighting, your engagement ranges, your coherency measures, and your consolidation moves, all with a single little tool. And given the way 9th edition is kind of played right now, having access to these just speeds up that very nuanced and technical part of the game. None of these are essential. Just have a tape measure and see if you need the other things. I've just found that it helps having the combat gauges because it just allows me, who is playing a combat army, to be able to do them far more accurately and so on. Sorry, my nose is itching. Right, dice is the next thing. So make sure you have enough dice with you that you can roll your biggest volume of attacks that you might make. So I'm going to speak of this from my view as playing Sisters, but this can be applied in any different aspect. So I have exactly 40 Bloody Rose dice. They're the GW ones, and I've just used them because I've been playing Bloody Rose for a year plus, and I've built up various dice heuristics around the fact that I have exactly 40 dice. And heuristics are just kind of simple cognitive shortcuts to allow you to do things quicker, which is not always essential, but it's very useful when you're playing in a timed environment. So having exactly 40 dice, if I roll my unit of 8 Repentia, I know they will have either 24 or 32 attacks, depending on whether I cast War Hymn on them or not. And what I will do is, okay, so 32 is 40 minus 8. So rather than count out 32 dice, I will count out 8 dice and then roll the rest. If I'm rolling 24, what I am typically doing in between kind of my dice rolls and when I'm not doing anything else is I'm counting my dice into piles of 5. And what I do then is I say 24 dice is 5 piles of 5 minus 1. Take it out. And that allows me to roll the dice much quicker. What I often do is I will always try to tell my opponent how many dice I have at the start of the game, why I am applying these heuristics, so that they are part and parcel of it. They're always welcome to count, they're always welcome to check, but if I can speed up the game in any way to make it a faster and more interactive game for us, then I will. One of the things I haven't needed to do in Sisters, but I have seen some people do before, is color code your dice. So what you can do with this is, say you are playing an army which has multiple shooting profiles. You could say have all, like Tau as an example, and you have a crisis unit which has cyclic, burst, cyclic, plasma. And I think that is 6 shots of burst, 3 shots of cyclic, 1 shot of plasma. So they will have cyclic in one color, burst in one color, so 6 dice that are red, cyclic in another color, maybe green, and then plasma in another color, blue, as an example. And then they can just roll all those dice together and they know exactly which ones are which. Obviously, this comes with a bit of the kind of rules on fast rolling, slow rolling, etc. But the case in almost all circumstances is just let your opponent know what you're doing in advance and let them know the shortcuts you're taking to make a faster game happen. As for other things, again, this is a nice to have but not necessary. If you're rolling buckets of dice, consider a dice tray. It means you can just say, right, I'm always going to roll in the tray. If anything falls outside of it, I will re-roll it. If anything, and just put it in the middle because then everyone can see it. I've seen people share dice trays, everything like that. It's just a way to stop dice flying all over the place. Again, not essential, not required, but can make an easier and smoother game. So for the next part of preparation, this comes down to learning your rules and understanding your codex. But this is a lot easier said than done. Now, my understanding is there is nothing that prevents you from making notes or taking them into a game with you. In various card games, they have limitations on this, but I think because of the complexity of Warhammer, they've never introduced anything like this. What this means is you can actually annotate and mark up your codex, put tabs down the side so you can shortcut to various places. And this basically means there is less time spent looking at your book and more time spent actually playing and making the tactical and strategic decisions required in the game. So one of the things I've seen done is just tab out all the weapon profiles because they're all together at the back. Tab out your specific faction. So say I'm playing Bloody Rose, I'll have a tab on the Bloody Rose tab, and then key data sheets that you're going to be using. And that way, in the game, you can very quickly just flick to where you need to. The other thing when learning a codex is to learn kind of the default profiles and then learn the exceptions to them. So what I mean by this is most armies have a default stat line. So for Sisters of Battle, it is toughness 3, 3+ armor, and 6+ invuln. And that's the majority of the codex. Then I learn the differences to it. So Repentia, they don't have the armor. That's fine. They're still T3, they're still 6+ invuln. That's what I need to learn for that. Morvenval has a different stat line, and so on and so forth. And you learn the exceptions, not the bulk. And again, it speeds up the process. This is the same with weapon profiles. So again, in Bloody Rose, all power weapons go from AP -3 to AP -4. And similarly, any melter weapons are also AP -4. So I can say, in the majority of cases, the AP of my big stuff, or my most output-led units, is AP -4, which helps speed up the process. And then I only look up the exceptions to that. So that's just a way to kind of build your codex to work for you. The next section is building a cheat sheet. Again, you're allowed to take notes with you to the table, so having a cheat sheet can really help in this. This is particularly useful for complex armies that have, say, multiple layered buffs, a very complicated command phase that you need to pick things in, a psychic phase that requires correct ordering, or just any army in general. It's things that help speed this up. So the way I do this is I have one sheet of A4 and then I have two sides to it. But the first one is laid out in the phase order of a turn. So command phase, movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charge phase, combat phase, morale phase. And that is kind of... And then I put the key parts in each section within that phase, so that, and what I'm doing here is I'm creating a tick list, or a have you done that, have you done this yet. So as an example from Sisters of Battle, I will have, just checking my notes here, command phase, give out Val rerolls, roll my litanies. In the movement phase, res from the Hospitaller if I want to use 1 CP, or shoot with Seraphim if I want to do that for 1 CP. And similarly, I will have these various abilities that are just kind of listed down, so that I can say, I don't need to do that, I don't need to do that, I don't need to do that, do that, do that. And it just speeds up that thought process, because then I'm aware of what I have to do and when I have to do it. In games, most people will be happy if you say, oh, I forgot to do this, do you mind if I do it? And they'll just be like, yeah, sure, it doesn't change anything, just do it. But you don't want to get caught out by someone just being awkward or anything like that. Just make sure you have your list and say, oh, it was my intent to do this, etc. And then on the back side of that sheet, I have the core stratagems I'm going to use laid out by output, defensive, and utility. And the reason I do this is most strats are typically connected to a single data sheet. So it's things like this is Repentia Fight on Death. That Fight on Death can't be used anywhere else. It's just Repentia. And if I don't have Repentia in my army, I don't need to be aware of that stratagem, and so on. And what it means is I can look at the correct part of my strats for the most important sections as and when they occur in the game. So output will be things like, okay, my Bloody Rose stratagem for 6s to wound, 6s to hit, automatically wound, or +1 damage on 6s to wound, etc., etc. And I can be like, right, I need maximum output, so I'm going to use both of those in the same place, or I need output in 2 locations, I'm going to use those 2 spread across 2. Defensive, if there's something happening in my opponent's shooting phase, this isn't directly relevant for sisters, but as Space Marines, I'm going to activate transhuman physiology as an example. And just having them laid out to know what you can do in response or in advance of something happening, again, it's all to facilitate a smoother and quicker game for both you and your opponent. And those are the kind of main things I've done to speed up games and to improve my own ability, because what happens eventually is after you've played with this cheat sheet for like 6-9 months, you've started to memorize bits of it just because you've been doing it day in, day out, activating the same abilities, doing the same things, and then you stop needing it and you start learning other parts of the army. And it's just a great way to speed up gameplay and to ultimately enjoy the actual game more than the logistical bookkeeping that can come with it. But anyway, hopefully this has been a good kind of introduction to what you can do to prepare in advance of a tournament. And next episode, we are going to be covering what to think about in your army list ahead of a tournament. So before you submit your army list, what you should think about when you're building it and what to prepare for at an event with the actual list you're building. So anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. One of the things that I've started saying, I'm not certain how much or how well these will be received, but largely, if you do like this, if this is something of interest to you and you do enjoy what I've been preparing here, please do like, subscribe to my channel and everything like that, because it lets me know people are interested and that I should be recording more of them. So anyway, that's where we are. I hope you've enjoyed this series so far, and we've got 1 episode left. Thank you very much.